8 minutes after 10, and I suppose we should start with the good news that we are still here. But when it comes to our international reputation, our political establishment, the sanctity, if you allow that word, of our parliament and the state of our nation, then the news is sort of less good. The scenes in the House of Commons yesterday, I don't know how much of them you witnessed personally, how much you heard reported later in the day after we'd said goodbye on LBC. The scenes in the House of Commons yesterday have no place in a functioning democracy. The way in which Boris Johnson infects everything and everybody he comes into contact with has, in the last fortnight, extended to the Metropolitan Police Service and our sovereign parliament. Some of the comments he made yesterday in response to the best speech by some distance of Keir Starmer's career are beneath contempt, regardless of your politics. If you care a jot for this country, not just for its international reputation, but for its national integrity, if you care one jot for this country that you call home, then you should have felt deep disgust at Boris Johnson's performance yesterday. And it was a performance, remember, prompted by the findings of a report he was forced to commission after details of countless parties that had been held in or on the grounds of his office, and which he frequently and repeatedly denied after those allegations were found to be true. It is almost impossible, even when you do this every day, and I mean that, whether you're doing the talking like I am or the listening like you currently are, although you will be invited to do the talking shortly, it is almost impossible to keep a lid or to keep a grip upon things. The way in which we've gone from the claim that there weren't any parties to the claim that the rules were obeyed and there may have been gatherings, to the claim that if there were, I certainly didn't know about them or attend them, to the claim that, well, actually they were and I did know about them because I did attend them, but I didn't realise they were parties, to the defence of birthday cakes and now claims of an ABBA-themed knees-up in the actual prime ministerial flat, the one that he... God, I'm sorry. Because right there it is. There it is. This is how it works. This is what we're losing. Because right there, I mentioned the prime ministerial flat, and you know how my brain works by now. So there's this little synapse somewhere at the back of my brain. Go, whoa, what about the wallpaper? So you start talking about one scandal, and then the snowballing effect of that scandal, i.e. the parties, or as we prefer to call it, the breaking of the laws that the rest of us obeyed by the man who made the laws and then lied about them, including in Parliament. And that little synapse in your brain, because you just mention the flat and you try and find the words to describe the scandal surrounding the decoration of the flat, the WhatsApp that he forgot. So you can't, it's so hard to keep a clear bead ahead of you. So you start talking about one scandal, and immediately two more have kicked in. Number one, trying to get money off a Conservative donor to tart up the flat in a way that even Dominic Cummings found to be egregious. And then number two, claiming that he had no memory of it because he had changed phones and his WhatsApp had not been transferred from one phone to this. So, and there it is already, 6 minutes after 10, and your humble correspondent has lost the thread. Already. I never lose the thread. Well, all right, I sometimes lose the thread. But that's incredible. So it's almost as if, and this is the challenge, of course, that the opposition faces, and that includes opposition in his own party, of which, please God, there'll be some soon, because this cannot continue. This is a national tragedy, entirely self-inflicted national tragedy now. And that's the problem that his opponents face, whether they're in the Conservative Party, whether they're on opposition benches, or whether they are the tiny little corners of the media that aren't completely in the pockets of the various non-dom billionaires who installed Boris Johnson in Downing Street in the first place. So let's try again. This is how it unfolded. It started with denials that there had been any parties, OK? And then it shifted to a claim that there may have been some work gatherings, but all rules were definitely obeyed, to a claim that there had been parties, but they definitely hadn't been attended by Boris Johnson, to the admission that the party had been attended by Boris Johnson, and that he was under the impression that it wasn't a party, therefore his conduct was defensible, through to a birthday celebration being thrown in the presence of his wife and his interior decorator, where a cake was served, which they couldn't even attempt to defend as not a flagrant breach of all the available rules, so they instead I just sort of hoped you'd stop talking about it and set free some of the most morally corrupt members of this profession to claim that there was nothing to see here and we should all move along and look at something else. And then this report dropped yesterday, which was a curious philosophical proposition because it was simultaneously castrated and yet powerful. It was simultaneously censored and yet stuffed with incriminating evidence. The simple fact that the Metropolitan Police are now investigating 12 separate alleged breaches of coronavirus legislation committed by the very people responsible for formulating and implementing the coronavirus legislation. That's just not normal. How many times would any other politician, any other Prime Minister have resigned over the course of the last few years? Let's say the last few months. And yet he's still there. He's still there. Like the most stubborn limpet. It's quite incredible. And what it has historically depended upon, and he is unique, make no mistake, Boris Johnson is unique. There are parallels to be drawn with Donald Trump, there are parallels to be drawn with Silvio Berlusconi, but he wears his moral corruption more lightly than Donald Trump and Silvio Berlusconi. He couches it in a sort of Benny Hill-type cheekiness. Occasionally the mask slips and you see the darkness beneath the facade. But for the most part, he manages to sustain this character that he constructed presumably at prep school and fine-tuned at Eton and then took into the debating chambers of Oxford and then waltzed onto Fleet Street and from there into the mayoral office and ultimately Parliament. This very carefully constructed exterior that works a treat. You're tired, I'm tired of hearing all the stories of people who've heard him deliver the same speech on several different occasions, make the same claim of being unprepared for an event in identical circumstances on different occasions, deliberately ruffling his hair before he walks onto the stage, pretending he's forgotten where he is. And it has been lapped up for years. And yet yesterday in the House of Commons, it was just gross. When he sought to bring Jimmy Savile into his response to Sir Keir Starmer, I feel a new depth was plumbed, even by the standards of Boris Johnson in the era of Brexit. That was just gross. Absolutely gross. It's a lie. It's a proven lie. It's an established lie, lifted wholesale from the darkest corners of the far-right conspiracy media. Well, do you know what? On the one hand it is. On the other hand, and this is why it's interesting to hear that he's rehired some of the people responsible for perpetrating the disasters that Boris Johnson is always at the helm of, it was not dissimilar from the claims that Gordon Brown sold all the gold or Hillary Clinton's emails. They put something out there with the tiniest scintilla of truth, in this case being Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions while Jimmy Savile was alive. So you have this tiny little wafer-thin scintilla of truth and you feed it to people in the hope that it will grow into a huge and damaging lie. And you expect it from racists on Twitter. You expect it now, sadly, from people who work for these websites masquerading as news organisations that deal in little more than tittle-tattle and racist provocations. You expect it even now from newspaper columnists who frankly should know better. There's one in the Mail today who's written an entire column about what would have happened if Remain had won the referendum. And that's not even a joke or a parody. It's like, what can I do? Well, how can I possibly cling to the idea that I'm not part of a national disaster, that I don't bear as a prominent columnist on this particular newspaper? How can I possibly escape the obvious conclusion that I bear personal responsibility for this absolute disaster? Oh, I know. I'll write a complete fantasy about what would have happened if the Remain side had won their referendum that right up until last week I was telling everybody to stop talking about because it was getting boring. It is beyond pathetic. And it is so hard to keep this bead, isn't it? To keep this line, to keep this focus. So I think we focus on the parties. Obviously, we focus on the parties. The Metropolitan Police are focusing on the parties. But what question do I ask you? Don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think you enjoy listening, and I don't enjoy asking to the same variations on the same answer to a similar question ad infinitum. How angry are you on a scale of 1 to 10? What's the bit that makes you angriest? I'm interested in what's happening beyond Parliament. I am interested in what's happening in the minds of people who are as disgusted by what they see as people who knew it was coming. I think you're probably the most important members of this conversation now. I knew this was coming. I don't want to sound smug. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I wish it wasn't. Anyone who's listened to this programme for more than 20 minutes over the last 10 years will know that I knew this was coming. I knew that if you put him in Downing Street, all of this would happen. Quite what flavour it would be and how it would be packaged and what the issues would be, I obviously could not know. I'm not clairvoyant. But the knowledge that Boris Johnson corrupts and infects every single thing into which he comes into contact has now extended absolutely to the office of Prime Minister and the Queen. Let's think about that for 5 seconds. The office of Prime Minister and Her Majesty the Queen, polluted by Boris Johnson. The Queen misled into authorising the proroguing of Parliament. Parliament yesterday reduced to hosting a Prime Minister indulging in despicable lies, punted on social media by despicable people. Every single thing he touches, he pollutes. So how do we build a bridge between those of us who knew it was coming and those of us who didn't? This is why I always make a point of telling you that I voted for him to be mayor in 2008, because there's no shame in being mugged by one of the most effective muggers in the history of British politics. The shame is in sticking with him when he's got both his hands in your pockets. So I presume now that people who consider themselves to be conservative, whatever that means, in 2022, I presume now that if you're not as disgusted as me, then you must be Nadine Dorries. I can see very little other conclusion to arrive at than if you are not as disgusted as me by what is happening now, and by particularly what happened yesterday, then you must be Nadine Dorries. Or Michael Fabricant or Jacob Rees-Mogg. So when Dominic Raab talked earlier of MPs are behind him, I think now they are like rabbits caught in headlights. They know that there is a vehicle heading towards them at 100 miles an hour, but they're frozen. They have absolutely no idea what to do. This isn't a sympathy, by the way. This isn't excuse. This is explanation. They have absolutely no idea what to do. If they have the vaguest modicum of decency, sincerity, honesty, integrity, call it whatever you want. And listen, I know we're supposed to be tribal, but some of them do. It's buried deep now. It had to be buried deep if you wanted to stay in the party in 2019, but some of them do. They are just frozen with fear. Some of the 2019 intake will be marvelling at how quickly their dream has turned to dust. Chanting and cheering when they arrived in Parliament on the back of Boris Johnson's 80-seat majority, and now they find themselves hitched to the most appalling political vehicle in the history of our island. So what do? They haven't got a clue. They're there like little rabbits caught in the headlights. But I'm interested in everybody else. I'm interested in how hard is it to admit the scale of the mistake? And that's why I know it's a little bit self-referential, but I have to look at it through the lens of my own existence, just like you look at everything through the lens of your own existences and experiences. Can you imagine what it's like to sit here, having spent years describing Boris Johnson in forensic and irrefutable detail? Can you imagine how awful it is now to have it all come completely and utterly true in real time, in glorious technicolor, in the country that you and I both love and call home? Can you imagine what that's like? It's one of the worst experiences of my life, certainly my working life, because it is arguably even worse than we feared now. So, little letter from the Telegraph this morning. As a habitual Conservative voter, I can say that yesterday in Parliament, Sir Keir Starmer spoke for me. I abhor the notion that this Prime Minister represents our country on the international stage. When will he get the message? And that's your question. When will he get the message? 0345 6060 973. And as a habitual Conservative voter, did Sir Keir Starmer speak for you yesterday? 0345 6060 973. And because I like to do things in threes, as a habitual Conservative voter, have you now reached the end of your tether? And if you haven't, I appreciate I haven't made you feel terribly welcome, but you are. If you haven't reached the end of your tether yet, tell me why, please. If I promise not to interrupt, will you promise to give me a really careful and thoughtful analysis of why all of what's happened is not enough for you to change your view? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:19. 22 minutes after 10. Cometh the hour, cometh the man.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Sue Gray for the diligence and professionalism with which she's carried out her work. It's no fault of hers that she's only been able to produce an update today, not the full report. The Prime Minister repeatedly assured the House that the guidance was followed and the rules were followed. But we now know that 12 cases have reached the threshold for criminal investigation, which I remind the House means that there is evidence of serious and flagrant breaches of lockdown, including the party on the 20th of May 2020, which we know the Prime Minister attended, and the party on the 13th of November 2020 in the Prime Minister's flat. There can be no doubt that the Prime Minister himself is now subject to criminal investigation. The Prime Minister must keep his promise to publish Sue Gray's report in full when it is available. But it is already clear that the report discloses the most damning conclusion possible. Over the last 2 years, the British public have been asked to make the most heart-wrenching sacrifices. A collective trauma, endured by all, enjoyed by none. Funerals have been missed, dying relatives unvisited. Every family has been marked by what we've been through. And revelations about the Prime Minister's behaviour have forced us all to rethink and relive those darkest moments. Many have been overcome by rage, by grief, and even guilt. Guilt that because they stuck to the law, they did not see their parents one last time. Guilt that because they didn't bend the rules, their children went months without seeing friends. Guilt that because they did as they were asked, they didn't go and visit lonely relatives. But people shouldn't feel guilty. They should feel pride in themselves and their country, because by abiding by those rules, they've saved the lives of people they will probably never meet. They have shown the deep public spirit and the love and respect for others that has always characterised this nation at its best. Our national story about COVID is one of a people that stood up when they were tested. But that will be forever tainted by the behaviour of this Conservative Prime Minister. By routinely breaking the rules he set, the Prime Minister took us all for fools. He held people sacrificing contempt. He showed himself unfit for office. His desperate denials since he was exposed have only made matters worse. Rather than come clean, every step of the way, he's insulted the public's intelligence. And now he's finally fallen back on his usual excuse. It's everybody's fault but his. They go, he stays. Even now, he is hiding behind a police investigation into criminality, into his home and his office. Mr. Speaker, he gleefully treats what should be a mark of shame as a welcome shield. But, Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame. And just as he has done throughout his life, he's damaged everyone and everything around him along the way. His colleagues have spent weeks defending the indefensible, touring the TV studios, parroting his absurd denials, degrading themselves and their offices, fraying the bond of trust between the government...
Oh, order. The member for South Ribble is my neighbour. I expect better from my neighbours. Keir Starmer.
Fraying the bond of trust between the government and the public, eroding our democracy and the rule of law. Margaret Thatcher once said, "The first duty of government is to uphold the law. If it tries to bob and weave and duck around that duty when it's inconvenient, then so will the governed." Mr. Speaker, to govern this country is an honour, not a birthright. It is an act of service to the British people, not the keys to a court to parade to your friends. It requires honesty, integrity and moral authority. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me that this Prime Minister's lack of integrity is somehow priced in, that his behaviour and character don't matter. I have never accepted that, and I never will accept that. Whatever your politics, whichever party you vote for, honesty and decency matters. Our great democracy depends on it. And cherishing and nurturing British democracy is what it means to be patriotic. There are members opposite who know that, and they know the Prime Minister is incapable of it. The question they must now ask themselves is, what are they going to do about it? They can heap their reputations, the reputation of their party, the reputation of this country on the bonfire that is his leadership. Or they can spare the country from a Prime Minister totally unworthy of his responsibilities. It is their duty to do so. They know better than anyone how unsuitable he is for high office. Many of them knew in their hearts that we would inevitably come to this one day. And they know that as night follows day, continuing his leadership will mean further misconduct, cover-up and deceit. It is only they that can end this farce. The eyes of the country are upon them. They will be judged by the decisions they take now.
Prime Minister!
God, it's been a while, hasn't it, since you heard a speech from a prominent British politician that actually sounded as if they cared about the values that the rest of us hold so dear. You think of the pathetic little nonsenses punted by Farage and his mates under the guise of patriotism, taken up with full throat by the Boris Johnson brand of conservatism, and then a reminder after God knows how long, 6, 7 years, of what it really sounds like, a proper sense of duty, a proper sense of wanting to govern an entire country, and a proper sense of shame at what Boris Johnson has done. But of course, Keir Starmer is the leader of the Labour Party, so he would say that, wouldn't he? Here's the last leader of the Conservative Party.
The COVID regulations impose significant restrictions on the freedoms of members of the public. They had a right to expect their Prime Minister to have read the rules, to understand the meaning of the rules, and indeed those around him to have done so too, and to set an example in following those rules. What the Gray report does show is that Number 10 Downing Street was not observing the regulations they had imposed on members of the public. So either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to Number 10. Which was it?
It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has the headlines. 10:34 is the time. My apologies to Alex and Mark and to everybody else waiting to contribute. We're doing things a little differently today because sometimes we just need to remind ourselves of the scale of the madness before us. This is the Prime Minister.
this leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, so he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker.
A blatant and proven lie, defended perhaps inevitably. Well, I don't need to tell you who by.
One of the things the Prime Minister said today in the House of Commons that was basically untrue, and clearly untrue, was his allegation that Keir Starmer was responsible for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile. How can you have a Prime Minister just repeating fake news like that?
I have no idea the background of Keir Starmer, and I know
it's
that
not true, and the Prime Minister repeated it. It's an old meme that's just repeated by...
Well, you know, there were things that Keir Starmer said that someone who was the former Director of Public Prosecutions shouldn't have said at the dispatch box.
He didn't say anything that wasn't true.
He shouldn't have prejudged what a Met investigation is going to find.
He didn't say anything that was untrue.
Well,
Boris Johnson said something that was untrue.
He said things that were inappropriate.
The House today.
I don't believe that's the case.
Well, it is. What, you're saying that Keir Starmer was responsible for not
I don't know the details.
Well, that's what the Prime Minister said.
Well, you haven't heard
he
your
shouldn't
word
have
for
said it, should he?
Well, I think there are lots of things that Keir Starmer shouldn't have said.
Well, there are clearly things that he said that aren't true.
The Prime Minister
now, whether they were deliberate lies or not has yet to be established. But he's clearly said things to the House that were not true.
The Prime Minister tells the truth.
There it is. That's the moment at which you ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears, right there, from a Cabinet Minister. The Prime Minister tells the truth. The Prime Minister, everybody knows, has lied. Everybody knows that. The only reason Ian Blackford got thrown out of the House of Commons yesterday was because of historical traditions of etiquette in Parliament. Everybody knows he's lied. But the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and remember, she's not shy about trying to get journalists sacked if they do things she doesn't like. Krishna Gurumurthy there, a bit like Keir Starmer, reminding us what the real deal looks like. No wonder he's just been nominated for a Royal Television Society Presenter of the Year award. That is, I'm going to play you that again because I hadn't fully addressed the sheer scale of the delusion here on the part of a Cabinet Minister. All right? Just listen to it. Boris Johnson, let's just run through it quickly before we hear her defend it. Boris Johnson insisted there were no parties, then said that there had been gatherings but the rules were obeyed, then said that there had been parties perhaps and he was very furious about it, but he certainly hadn't been anywhere near them. Then said that he had been to these parties, a party, some parties, but he hadn't realised that the one he was absolutely busted for attending had actually been a party. He thought it had been something other than a party, even though everybody else there thought it was a party. And now it emerges that they had a knees up in his own flat on the night Dominic Cummings was thrown out of Downing Street. So it is categorically, physically and intellectually impossible to defend his reputation as a teller of truth. It is literally impossible. It is like handing somebody an apple and telling them it is cheese. But here's the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport.
One of the things the Prime Minister said today in the House of Commons that was basically untrue, and clearly untrue, was his allegation that Keir Starmer was responsible for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile. How can you have a Prime Minister just repeating fake news like that?
I have no idea the background of Keir Starmer, and I know
it's
that
not true, and the Prime Minister repeated it. It's an old meme that's just repeated by...
Well, you know, there were things that Keir Starmer said that someone who was the former Director of Public Prosecutions shouldn't have said at the dispatch box.
He didn't say anything that wasn't true.
He shouldn't have prejudged what a Met investigation is going to find.
He didn't say anything that was untrue.
Well,
Boris Johnson said something that was untrue.
He said things that were inappropriate.
The House today.
I don't believe that's the case.
Well, it is. What, you're saying that Keir Starmer was responsible for not
I don't know the details.
Well, that's what the Prime Minister said.
Well, you haven't heard
he
your word
shouldn't have said it, should he?
Well, I think there are lots of things that Keir Starmer shouldn't have said.
Well, there are clearly things that he said that aren't true.
The Prime Minister
now, whether they were deliberate lies or not has yet to be established. But he's clearly said things to the House that were not true.
The Prime Minister tells the truth.
Donald Trump claims that he won the last election despite the absolutely irresistible evidence that he lost. And in America, Republicans now queue up to endorse his lies. And I wonder when you began to wonder whether we really were better than that. It is now 20 to 11, and although I've gone for an astonishing amount of time without taking a call, for once, it's not because I've been talking. So get off my back about that, if you would. Where do you even start? Where do you even start? Let's start with Helen Porter in the Daily Telegraph today. Sir, as a habitual Conservative voter, I can say that yesterday in Parliament, Sir Keir Starmer spoke for me. I abhor the notion that this Prime Minister represents our country on the international stage. When will he get the message? And apart from turning off your radio, sticking your head in the sand, putting your fingers in your ears and going la la la, or indeed doing an impression of Nadine Dorries, how today can you not feel as she feels? Feel as Julian Smith feels, former chief whip in the Conservative Party, referring specifically, I think he was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, wasn't he, as well, even under Boris Johnson. So a cabinet seat on the under this actual Prime Minister. And he's tweeted in the last hour, the smear made against Keir Starmer relating to Jimmy Savile yesterday is wrong and cannot be defended. It's an insufferable lefty who used to be the chief whip of the Conservative Party. It should be withdrawn. False and baseless personal slurs are dangerous, corrode trust, and can't just be accepted as part of the cut and thrust of parliamentary debate. I'll remind you again, Donald Trump lost an actual election, sought to overthrow the result by unleashing an armed mob upon the Capitol, continues to claim that he was somehow robbed of the result, and prominent established Republican politicians in America are queuing up to support his lies, before we even mention Rupert Murdoch's organisation, Fox News. And we've got that here. We've got Rupert Murdoch-owned media, who thankfully are yet to stoop anywhere near as low as Fox Media, but we've got politicians every bit as repugnant as the ones endorsing Donald Trump's lies, because yesterday the Prime Minister lied, again, in the House of Commons, and you have at least one cabinet minister there claiming that he tells the truth. Even she knows. Even a bear of so little brain must know, somewhere inside, that he doesn't. Anyway, over to you. Alex is in Leigh-on-Sea. Have you nodded off, Alex, or are you still with us at the back?
Still with you, James, just about. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome. Where are we? What's going on?
Oh, I don't know where to begin with this. I mean, I've voted Tory for most of my adult life.
Yeah.
I believe in what used to be Tory traditions, such as tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, if you want to say that.
Sure.
Control of budgets, control of our economy. But this utterly appalls me. And in direct answer to your immediate question about when will this moron get the message, I think
that's not quite how I put it, but there you go. Yeah, but I can understand how you might have heard that treatment of the inquiry.
But no, in all honesty, I mean, part of the difficulty with this is, in order to prosecute the guy from a criminal perspective, when you've got the chief of the Met in his pocket, that makes life extremely difficult. But I'm appalled at all this. I mean, even a prison stretch wouldn't do for the man unless it was in excess of 5 years.
When did you snap?
Get the message in.
When did you snap, if you don't mind me asking?
About 3-4 weeks ago, to be honest with you, once all this started to tumble out.
Yeah.
But there are a number of alarming things about this in terms of erosion of public confidence in our democracy, in terms of the erosion of everything we hold dear in terms of freedoms, in terms of the recognition of the rule of law. And one thing that scares me is this buffoon swanning off to the Ukraine to possibly try and prevent nuclear Armageddon, which I know is a hell of a stretch, but nonetheless, I've just thought...
No, well, he's not. I mean, call it a silver lining, but he's not going now because he's so caught up in trying to deal with internal party matters, and also Liz Truss has caught COVID. So sitting in the House of Commons yesterday, no mask...
It's Billy Smart's circus, but...
Isn't it? Can you do me a favour? Can you do me a quick favour? Can you just address briefly other lifelong Conservative voters who are listening to this programme while simultaneously texting me to tell me that they're turning it off, but we both know they're not. Can you just help them get to where you've got to?
I think you have to recognise, firstly, the difference between right and wrong. The man's a proven liar, as we all know, and if you can't recognise what's good and bad for the nation, I mean, the answer is the ballot box, but that's too late. That ship has sailed. I mean, we can get rid of this absolutely appalling shower of liars, cheats and charlatans in 2023 or 24, whenever the next election comes around.
Or there may be an Augean stable type leadership. You could perhaps replace him with someone who would wash away all that has followed. But final question, how tarnished is everybody else?
That's another part of the problem.
It is.
I mean, the whole of the front bench is absolutely dripping with
even Sunak, even Rishi Sunak.
Up to a point, I think he's the only member of the front bench that's got some kind of respect for the electorate and some kind of respect for the population, insofar as the fact that he threw an awful lot of money at the pandemic, which, to his credit, was needed and required. We all have to pay for that in one way or another, sadly. And this comes back to my point about fiscal controls and control of the economy. But that doesn't... I'm not trying to excuse this moronic performance by somebody who...
But it is just right and wrong. So that is it. Is you just say to people, look, either you care about what's right and what's wrong, or you don't. Either you care about a Prime Minister who lies about breaking the rules that he makes... or you don't. And I don't really believe that anybody deep down doesn't care. It's just this bizarre... The leap you made 3 or 4 weeks ago is a very hard leap to make sometimes.
Yes, it is. I mean, as I say, I've still got my own personal beliefs about the way the country should go and what have you. But as you've said, it's a fundamental choice here between what is clearly corrupt, inexcusable and wrong, and respect for the populace and respect for the way that our country should be run. I would say to my fellow Tory supporters, or a lot of possibly ex-Tory supporters, traditional Tory supporters, that you just have to recognise that this can't carry on. And as I say, there's so much criminality involved that surely... Potentially, yes. Sorry, I'm making allegations here, and I've got to be careful about what I say. I totally understand that.
I've got your back. I've got your back.
But it's just... I mean, my late grandfather was a working-class northern lad, and he used to work in a massive mill in a town called Hatlingden, north of Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
I remember I was a little boy, and I used to go to the mill and watch him work.
Go on.
And he would be spinning in his coffin at what's going on at the moment. I mean, it's just,
Well, that's it. That's what you've reminded me of, as someone who, and I hope this doesn't come as a major shock to anybody, as someone who's not a lifelong, or indeed by any stretch of the imagination, a traditional Conservative voter. There has to be, and this is the point Alex has just made for us, there has to be stuff we all agree on. That's what creates a society. That's what creates a country. The stuff we can all agree on, or almost all. You may have, inevitably, some sort of fringe operators who believe that we can tear everything up and build it again, turn it off and turn it on again. But in the context of a functioning, developing democracy, society, civilization, there has to be stuff on which we all agree. And if you're not agreeing that the bloke who makes the rules, when he breaks them and lies about it, should face the highest sanction imaginable, if you don't agree with that, then you are... I mean, it's a horribly overused word, and one that... But that is... Well, I'm not going to use it. But there's a word for people who seek to undermine the glue, the fabric that binds our society together. 10:51 is the time, and it is the question of how. Listen, it's a slightly pithy phrase, but I do think it forms the basis of the question that intrigues me the most this morning. If you're not as disgusted as I am now, you must be Nadine Dorries. How can you not be as disgusted as I am, or Alex is, or Julian Smith is, or Theresa May is? How can you not be as disgusted now as... And I hate to put it like this, and I should probably stop, but I'll allow myself once more. How can you not be today as disgusted by Boris Johnson as all the people who knew that this was going to happen are? 0345 606 0973. Andrew's in Poole. Andrew, what do you reckon?
Well, a little bit of background on me. I canvassed as a student in the late 70s for Margaret Thatcher when she was coming to power as a young Conservative. I've been a party member. Invited to become a local councillor for the Conservative Party as a candidate for the Conservatives. Right. Have been a supporter all my life, and I'm absolutely appalled. And I have to say, I haven't changed. No. I am still the Conservative I was all those years.
It's a very good point.
The Conservative Party has moved someplace else, and this group who call themselves Conservatives right now are nothing to do with me and where I've ever been in my life. But the point I really phoned in and wanted to make is, and it builds on the point your last caller was talking about, when you talked about the front bench. Whilst we're all appalled at Boris Johnson, and there's enough been said about that, I look at the front bench and I ask myself what's going on there, because one particular individual, this is Rishi Sunak, hence the link to the previous caller, has been completely silent through all of this, other than one very brief interview where he walked out of the interview before it could continue on. And the question I would ask you and the others listening is that because he's had some high moral ground and he actually doesn't believe in all this nonsense that we're all being asked to go along with? Or is there something else here? Is he being in 11 Downing Street, was he actually involved in some of this stuff? And in order to stop him being somehow connected with it, they're keeping him under wraps and out of sight so that no journalist like yourself can ask him a simple question: were you ever involved in any of these parties? Were you aware of these parties? Because if he was to reply no to that question, the one person that people think, or seem to think, is the obvious person to rise above the mire that is this current cabinet, that one person might actually be being protected in this whole process.
I don't know what alarm that was that went off in the background, but I hope it was linked to the quality of your contribution to the programme. The Rishi Sunak alarm has been activated. I mean, for what it's worth, it's highly unlikely in my view that he attended any. I think that if that was going to come out, it probably would have come out already, although...
sorry to interrupt, but they did say that he actually went to the birthday cake party briefly. He put his nose around the corner.
You're absolutely right. He was there.
That. So I that's not actually true. I think there's much more under... Why on earth hasn't he... Everybody else, walk away along the cabinet there, every face has spoken. Not him.
And he's managing to keep... Well, then I would probably cite the John Major example when Ken Clarke and Heseltine and Hurd and others were vying to replace Margaret Thatcher. John Major managed, by dint of dental treatment, if I remember correctly, he managed to disappear for a fortnight. And I think, although he is Chancellor of the Exchequer... as was John Major, actually. I think I should have checked that. He is hiding.
Absolutely appalling.
Yeah, but he's hiding. He's just trying to keep away as far away as possible from the fray.
Maybe, but you've got the appalling Liz Truss, who has.
Yeah, but she thinks her chances. She thinks her chances lie in inflating these ludicrous balloons of trade deals. Sunak thinks his chance lies in where he is now reputationally. He'd probably take that going into a leadership election. Truss perhaps realises that although she's got support of, the kind of people you've been talking about who've stolen your party from you in a way, she's got their support. She probably feels she needs to garner support from elsewhere before going into a leadership election, whereas Sunak would probably take his chances tomorrow.
And Sunak is so powerful in the party that he's able, as apparently the most saleable commodity along that line.
Yeah, well,
he's able to resist the party forcing him to come out and speak favourably, because somehow he's managing... Well,
that's the point. That's a brilliant point. How has he managed to avoid the strong arm, the thumb screws, whatever it is that's being deployed? In some of their cases, of course, they need no thumb screws, they need no strong arms, but we've probably concerned ourselves with Nadine Dorries enough today. Can I ask briefly, when you snapped, when you...
Oh, gosh. I didn't vote for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives this last time around in 19 because it was absolutely apparent to me that this was, well, as you said yourself, this is where we were all headed.
Yes.
And as the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition yesterday said, this was inevitably where we're going to end up. You could see that from a mile away, but then, I say again, I'm a Conservative.
Yes, I get that.
Who didn't have a Conservative party to vote for at the last election.
I'm very glad you've made that point. And I think, all of the I told you so stuff, with regard specifically to Boris Johnson, does not give smug gits like me the right to say to you, well, there, finally, you see, you don't have to, you just see what Boris Johnson has become. It doesn't mean that your attitude to taxation, your attitude to law and order, it doesn't mean we're going to agree necessarily about any of that stuff. And this is the point. Ken Clarke made this point to me when he appeared on Full Disclosure. A few of you have reminded me in tweets that it's almost like the foundations of the country are the stuff we can all agree on. The standards. That's the word, isn't it? And look what they did. Look what Rees-Mogg did to the standards when Owen Paterson broke them. You have to have a framework, a basis, a foundation upon which you can build a democracy that invites and needs disagreement. But it has to be built on things that we agree about. So we don't have to agree about everything. God, that would be boring. But we have to agree about standards. And if we can't agree upon the basic unacceptability of a politician, never mind a Prime Minister, who lies and lies and lies again, then we've got a major, major problem. 10:58 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Time, I think we'll stay with this for a little longer, but not indefinitely, because it is going to be around all week, and then the Metropolitan Police report is going to come along as well. And I think our kind of mental equilibrium sometimes demands a little bit of diversity in the conversational fodder. Although when I tell you what I've got in mind, you may not believe me. There's a rather wonderful story about straight white men being charged more to get into nightclubs than anybody else. And I said to the producer this morning, we are going to reach a point in the next... And I could tell from her face she was thinking, we've already reached it, mate. I said, we are going to reach a point where the fact that I used to know a lot about nightclubs is going to become irrelevant. In the way that a few years ago when we were talking about universities and I realised that my student experience was actually irrelevant now. And you hear people on the radio who think that things they experienced in the 1970s, or you read articles more pertinently in the Daily Mail, columns in the Daily Mail by people who think the world should still be framed as it was in our youth. And I am perhaps today going to find out whether my fond but increasingly distant memories of nightclub culture have any place at all in talking about the decision of a so-called woke disco to charge different prices according to race, gender and sexual orientation. It's a bit of a humdinger, isn't it? But for now, we'll stay with the politics. 3 minutes after 11, keen to find out a little more about that independent police inquiry into... Because that's our local station. They're the ones that's slightly worried. They're the ones... I do this slightly Billy Big Bananas thing whenever there's police officers in front of me. In the queue at Pret a Manger, I always offer to pay for their breakfast. And now it turns out that Charing Cross Police Station is a hotbed of appalling behaviour. I'm not making light of it in any way, but I am keen to find out rather more. So we'll get Rachel on the programme at some point. And I'd like to have a longer look at this lie the Prime Minister told about Keir Starmer's role in the failure to prosecute Jimmy Savile. I mean, is it worth pointing out the relationship that Jimmy Savile had with the actual Conservative Party? Or would that be stooping to Boris Johnson's level? I don't think it would, because that would actually be true. So didn't he spend... I think he spent Christmas with Margaret Thatcher and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just saying that I'm keen to find out a little bit more about the precedent of a lie of such crassness. Something that I've read this morning in a few places. He was warned not to do by his advisors. Don't go there. But you always go there, don't you, if you're desperate, if you're like a cut snake, if you're fighting like a cat in a sack and you've got no moral compass or integrity at all, you'll say and do anything to get yourself out of trouble. How many times have you heard me say that? And speaking of things you've heard me say, thank you to everybody who's suggesting that I should be invoicing Keir Starmer's scriptwriters. I don't know about that, but it doesn't matter, does it? I think if it's effective and it works, doesn't matter where it comes from. And I'm sure he writes his own scripts and speeches after all. But the question of that line, the one that's going to stick, because it gets more evident, more clear every single day, that he corrupts and pollutes every single thing and every single person that he comes into contact with. So now you have Parliament polluted and you have senior Conservative MPs queuing up to condemn him for that particular act. Because when you're trying to wriggle out of an indefensible position, when you are trying to defend the indefensible, all bets are off. And this is what I mean about the foundation stones of civilization. This is what I mean about the standards upon which societies are built. So it's an unpleasant facet of political discourse that we always let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Oh my God, you did something in 1973 that you now regret and I disapprove of, therefore I can never take you seriously about anything. It's pathetic. It's childish, and it's not really proper politics, but it is a direct consequence of a tabloid culture that we live in. And that includes people who think they're far too clever to fall for tabloid cultures. They're just as bovine and shallow as the people who swallow it wholesale every single day. But you have to have standards. You have to have a bedrock. When you start dismantling the bedrock, when you have a cabinet minister saying, after the Prime Minister has lied in the House of Commons, that the Prime Minister tells the truth, the bedrock is breaking. And you can see how quickly it can break by glancing at America, where Republicans now, desperate for an endorsement from Donald Trump, are being essentially ordered. The only way you're going to get it is by endorsing my lies, Donald Trump's lies, about the last election. An election that he effectively tried to overturn. The evidence now is becoming insuperable. by inciting that mob to march upon Capitol, to storm the Capitol building, baying for his vice president's blood. That's how quickly it can fall in a Western democracy. Incredible. So the lie about Starmer, possibly a much bigger deal than we allow. And then you've always got that little voice in the back of your head. I must stop telling you about the voices in the back of my head. You'll be getting the wrong idea soon. But the worry that he's introduced it to public discourse. When we talk about it, even if we're doing, and I think Krishna Guru-Murthy got this absolutely bang on. You don't give them balance. You don't give them wiggle room. You don't treat it as an opinion to which Nadine Dorries offers up the counterbalancing opinion. Here is the truth. Here is a lie. You don't get to say, well, that's your opinion. It is true or it is not true. There is truth and there is untruth. All together now? And if you can hang on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad, as George Orwell almost said. So I thought Krishna nailed that, as they so often do on Channel 4 News last night. But the rest of the media won't. I talk about it. People have never heard it before. People who missed it yesterday, suddenly the two names are linked in the public consciousness. That's the plan. That's how it works. That's the Trumpian model. That's what Johnson does. And when he's desperate, there is no barrel with a bottom so low that he won't scrape it. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Bart's in Crawley. Bart, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning.
Hello.
Let me start with a little bit of disclosure. I did vote for Boris last time around, so I'm a bit of the problem myself. But I vividly remember moving to the UK over 20 years ago with no English, and frankly, I did it to escape the dangers of populism, lies, and corruption. And I truly felt blessed to live in this country, even through the needless self-flashing of Brexit. I did stand by it, stand by this country, and it's always been in my head that I live in a fully fledged democracy where the rule of law mattered. Now, having witnessed the absolute disaster of Partygate, which, as we all know, is only one of the scandals that they're involved in, and the fact that we can't even believe what our government is saying, and that we're willing to accept the lies and allow them to twist the truth to fit their narrative. Well, I happen to know one more leader who has been behaving just like that for many years now, and his name is Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
I really feel like I'm living in early Putin's Russia.
Really?
With all the nepotism, drinking parties, needless lies. Let's just not allow this dangerous man to drag us through the dirt and change this country into something that it's never been in my eyes. But that's all I've got to say, really.
Oh, well, blimey. Well, you can't get away that lightly, Bart. Where did you move here from? Poland, did you say?
Yeah, Poland, yes.
Well, then you know more about that side of Europe than I do. But the parallels with Putin seem...
I'm not talking about Putin now. I'm talking about Putin
the early days.
Straight after he was the mayor of St. Petersburg, and then magically he became the just like mayor of London. Then
you're igniting my sort of slightly dodgy patriotic genes here, and that means I've got patriotic impulses that are pure and noble. But I've got some.
Do I.
But I know you do, but I've got some that aren't pure and noble, and I don't want the UK Prime Minister to be compared to Vladimir Putin, but that's probably an emotional response rather than an intellectual one. So you're talking about what happened.
I'm sure there are better experts.
Donald Trump maybe
who could go through what Putin's done in the first 5 years and look at Boris Johnson's doing. And I'm not saying that UK is going to ever change into Russia.
Okay.
That's not going to happen.
No, I hear you.
I hope. But there are dangerous parallels. There's absolutely zero accountability for what this man does.
Yeah,
if I did in my leadership role 0.5% or a micron of what this man has done to this country, I'd be out of my job. Why is he still in his post?
I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know, because people don't seem to...
Well, we do know. The reason is the backbench Tory MPs are struggling to find the wherewithal to get rid of him for a variety of reasons. We might examine those a little further. I think, actually, to meet you in the middle, as it were, you are also talking about the breaking of the bedrock, and it might happen in different ways, and it might happen at different speeds, but once you start breaking the bedrock, once you've got an ally standing in front of a television camera saying that black is white, saying that the Prime Minister is telling the truth when he is demonstrably not telling the truth, then things start chipping away. And then you have the Prime Minister's own behaviour, not just his defenders, but it spreads like cancer through the foundations of the country, and then who knows where it could lead. And with Vladimir Putin, obviously...
All I wanted to say by my message is let's not go in that direction. We're never going to get to where Russia is, hopefully, but let's not even emulate any of the behaviours, because I always treated this country as an example of how a country should be run, and unfortunately, at this particular moment, I'm quite ashamed of it.
Yes, and you know, so am I, obviously, but I'm ashamed of the conduct of the people at the top and their continuing stay there. I'm not ashamed of my country, as it were, or I mean, it's hard to make the distinction sometimes, isn't it? But I do know exactly what you mean. But finally, Bart, when did it snap for you? When did you go, that's enough?
Well, actually, finally today, when the Deputy Prime Minister said that the full Sue Gray report has been shown to the public, and I just couldn't take it anymore. That was the final straw. How can you? That's another lie.
Yeah.
And that was, I believe, that was on your station early on today. He did say that, did utter these words, that the full Gray report has been sent to the public. So. I'm sorry, this feels Orwellian in its nature.
Yeah.
Just accept the truth and live the truth. And, yeah, I just want it to be all over, and we just need a new Prime Minister.
And I think, as with other callers, it's this sense of betrayal almost, or you don't want them to take your party away from you or your country away from you. That's the point, isn't it, about pollution? That's the point about infection. It starts off infecting the peak, the pinnacle, the head, and you think, well, that's a shame, but I'm far too low down the pyramid for it to affect me. But it does begin. I did wonder yesterday, how do we look to the rest of the world now? How do we look to the rest of the world? You could tell how desperate some of the cheerleaders and forelock tuggers have become, because there's an idea that, the rest of the world doesn't care about us. Don't be ridiculous. Of course, why do you think they have foreign correspondents in London? It's this point. The thing that fascinates me most about moments like this is the effort people put in. It's why today's calls are so interesting, because people they can't do it anymore. The effort you would put into trying to continue to support this man. You must be as disgusted as me, or you are Nadine Dorries. I don't think there's anything left in between the two positions anymore. And if you're comfortable with being Nadine Dorries, that's fine. I kind of respect that, but you should probably have a bit of a think and give your head a bit of a wobble. 11:17 is the time. I thought Bart's contribution was fascinating, because we are, all of us, guilty of exceptionalism, I think. Even those of us who spend our lives condemning it in others, that sense that we are raised, I think the way we're taught history, that we're taught history of these islands. You know, Henry VIII, I keep coming back to Henry VIII. I don't know why. I'm reading a lot of crime fiction set around the Tudor era. Because you get the history, but you also get the page turner. I've recommended various authors to you over the years. And then I read some of the stuff that they use as source material. I often read the history books as well. Henry VIII, when I was at school, he was like a cross between... I don't know, it's hard to think of someone who was a national hero when I was at school, because almost all of them have ended up in jail or completely disgraced subsequently. But he was like a cross. Even the footballers went a bit UKIP-y, didn't I? So I can't even choose them. Who was my absolute hero when I was... Well, you know, Henry VIII was like a cross between Elvis Presley and Trevor Francis. That doesn't quite work, but stay with me on this one. But in fact, he was a syphilitic psychopath who was in the habit of killing his wives. How did we not do that? Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. We did get taught. This is just, I mean, it's incredible. Should have come with a trigger warning. But then, of course, the Daily Telegraph would be up in arms. So I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. But I do wonder how we look. How do we look from where you are? I haven't got any phone lines free at the moment, but these parallels, there's stuff that I think most Brits never thought would happen in Britain, are now happening. You know, we've got epic lies being told in the House of Commons and then being defended by senior politicians. And it doesn't matter how ridiculous it is that these politicians have been promoted into these positions. The fact is they are senior. It's very weird for me, you know, because I keep telling you how much I hate it. And I really do. But there were moments. You think of the ones that I've had a particular problem with over the years, all right? So you start with Boris Johnson. Who would you say next? You're going to be looking at Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorries, Dominic Raab, Daniel Kawczynski, the bloke down in Shrewsbury. Who else is on that list? Who else have I had a particular problem with? 20 minutes after 11 is the time. And all of them are at the very forefront of these problems. I mean, the appointment of Rees-Mogg and Dorries should have been a clue about how bad things were for Johnson. So, you know, there's, I suppose, a modicum of vindication, such a stupid word, such a pompous word. There's a modicum of relief that I didn't do these people a disservice when I described them in the most negative of terms, because when you raise a Catholic, it's very hard to shed the sense of guilt that goes with transgression. So there's a relief. Thank goodness I didn't do them a disservice when I accurately described their uselessness and awfulness. There you go. But look at them now. Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, liar-in-chief to the Queen. It's incredible. It really is. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Nigel is in Lichfield. Nigel, what would you like to say?
Well, hello, James.
Hello.
All I'd like to say is these people that are ringing you and say how awful it is, what he's done and what have you. And I've always voted Labour. I'm a wealthy man and I've never voted Conservative ever in my life.
Right.
But these people knew what they were getting. Brexit, what did they think Brexit was? Just full of racists anyway. That's all they were doing. And it was all down to Conservative Party. So all these people have voted Conservative, voted for Boris, and then they turn around when he does something quite normal for him.
Yes.
And then they go, oh, isn't this awful? Isn't this awful? We must get rid of him. What did you expect you were getting? If you marry a mass murderer, there's a chance he might murder you.
Had you got that one ready before you came on, or did you just pluck it out?
He just plucked that one out.
Welcome to my world. I mean, obviously you're not wrong, and I was gearing up to challenge some of what you said, but you just pulled the rug from beneath my feet with that final analogy. I don't think we can afford to be scorched earth about it. I tried to allude to this loosely earlier when I talked about people who think you've got to be 100% on side in order to be... You're talking almost about ideological purity. Are people not allowed to change their minds, Nigel? Are they not allowed to regret previous actions?
No, not now. Not after Brexit, no.
Not with this particular political episode,
No,
you mean?
you're not.
Because it was so
No.
obvious and so huge.
Yes.
Well, I normally point out at this juncture the role that the media played in this, and I have sympathy for people persuaded by pretty much every organ or output that they ever encounter, telling them that this is a brilliant idea, that the European Union is their enemy, that membership is bad, that Boris Johnson is a stand-up guy who's really funny. And I know you can point at lots and lots of evidence that was not true, but if they don't see that evidence, or that evidence doesn't reach them with anything like the volume that all the nonsense and sycophancy reaches them, you can have some sympathy for where they end up, can't you? I think I can.
No, I have no sympathy at all. No, sorry.
That's absolutely fine.
They all knew what they were getting, and they have no right to moan. I mean, it's better that he stays, really, for the Labour Party, because if he stays, he'll make more of a mess. And so when it comes to an election, we might actually get a Labour government.
You never know. I think I had the trail for Jackie Smith and Ian Dale's podcast that was examining that question as well. And of course, in the support of your rather staunch position, there were all the ones that did walk away, or the Rory Stewarts and the Anna Soubrys and the rest of them who did know exactly what was on the horizon and were not prepared to zip their mouths and sit on their hands. They were prepared to walk away rather than go along with it. And I wonder how history is going to judge them. Although inevitably, they're the kind of people that Richard Littlejohn, writing in the Daily Mail today about, it doesn't matter how bad things have gone, but when you voted for the guy I've been cheering for years from my gated community in Florida, from my home in Florida, where I also write about why no one should work from home in this country. Imagine how awful it would have been if the other lot of Conservatives that I told you to support back in 2000... Thank you, Nigel. Fairly strident Nigel there. 24 minutes after 11 is the time. Clyde is in Keighley. Clyde, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I'll tell you what fascinates me is I heard a stat yesterday about 60-40 think that Boris needs to resign. Now, whether that falls to 52-48 at some stage...
get out of it. That's my catchphrase.
I know. But I am incredibly interested in this growing rhetoric about the Remainer plot,
Is it growing rhetoric? Are you sure our antennae are not too fine-tuned? I know yesterday they tried to launch this benefits business, and today the Mail has got one columnist saying, "Oh, wouldn't it have been awful if it had gone the other way?" Is it going to bite? Do you think this time? Is it going to work again?
I'm not sure, but I remember Lord Adonis saying that if you remove Boris, you remove Brexit. And I keep this language of Remainers and this, that and the other. Hang on a moment. You've got what you voted for. And what I'm interested in is that this the totem pole that Boris has become, is it, and let's remember the context that this was somebody who had 2 articles, one for Brexit,
the night
one
before,
against.
Of course.
But I am hearing people give this sympathy about, well, we need to keep him around and what have you. And is it this strong need that he symbolises? He's the totem pole that says, well, look, if we get rid of him, then, the magic unicorn and what have you disappears.
And that's a twofold proposition, because it's partly if we get rid of him, then, and I thought Lord Adonis's intervention was appallingly ill-advised for the record, but and not least because I don't think it's true. But if we get rid of Boris Johnson, then however you cut it, let's say it's 52%, then Brexit falls apart, which I don't think is true, but it's 48%, well, then I'd have to really question whether or not that massive nation-changing thing I bought from him personally in 2016 is actually worth the paper that it's printed on. So it may not be that they think they're going to lose their Brexit, it's that they're going to have a long, hard look at what they bought when they've finally come to their senses about who they bought it from.
Absolutely. And do you have a view that the Conservatives, do you think they're going to hang on until
well, I'll read you.
That they need the evidence.
The locals at the moment, I think, in the absence of the Metropolitan Police report, I think the locals, the May elections, will probably be the next Rubicon, because all bets are off, all rules are broken already. Any other leader would have gone long ago. There's 2 or 3 things that they couldn't have survived, and so I don't know what rules. Well, that's the thing. When you break the bedrock of standards, traditions, expectations, rules, you lose your ability to make meaningful predictions or to make meaningful forecasts, because you're working off a well-established rule book. For example, Owen Paterson. If you'd said to me a week before the Owen Paterson report dropped, I said, well, if it comes back and he's banged to rights, they'll try and rip it up and pass. They'll try and get it through Parliament that we should abandon the entire book of standards. I'd have said, don't be silly, Clyde. They're bad, but they're not that bad. And then along comes the liar in chief to the Queen, and he tries to do precisely that. And people who think they're patriotic are still tugging their little forelocks at people like Rees-Mogg and still doffing their caps. It's incredible. It's a national corruption on a scale that I think many people still don't fully appreciate.
It really is, and the Remainer plot, that if you've got people like Davis and Andrew Bridgen, that are, they are condemning and really are struggling to support Boris Johnson.
There they are.
Then where does the Remainer plot come in?
These damned Remainers like Andrew Bridgen submitting his letter of no confidence, and Mavis Davis insisting that he should walk away and resign as Prime Minister immediately. It is, I don't know. It's landed more with you than it has with me. That I mean, obviously they're going to try and inflate that balloon, but it burst when they tried to do it with Owen Paterson, and I think it burst again yesterday. I've not been able to find anyone who's read the full report into Brexit benefits, or I have, but they've all died laughing. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. Thank you, Clyde. I squeeze in Carol in Exeter. I've not got much time, Carol. I don't want to curtail you. I don't want to redact you like a Sue Gray report.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yes, it would. What made you pick up the phone?
I listen to you a lot.
Yes. Bad luck.
Bad luck. I really, going back even to when he was doing the Brexit. Yeah. And then when he came down to Exeter, when he wanted to be leader, and I'm a member of the Conservative Party, I never trusted him. He had no integrity. And therefore, I couldn't vote for him. And I didn't vote in the general election for Conservative Party because of him.
So he robbed you, really?
He destroyed all my trust.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And all my belief in the integrity of our democracy. And that goes back to even when he was doing Brexit with that bloody bus. Excuse me. Sorry.
Yes, that's all right.
He should have put that right then, and he didn't. and he can't put what he's right now. And there should be a system that if you've got somebody who's high up in government who is under a police investigation, that there should be an automatic suspension until such a time as that investigation is completed.
I think if you drove a bus, you'd be under suspension if you were subject to a police investigation. I mean, it would depend on what the allegations are, but I'm pretty sure they'd take me off air if I was under investigation by the police
you should be.
Well, hang on, I haven't done anything. Hang on, this is a hypothetical. I haven't done anything, Carol.
I know.
Squeaky clean.
And neither have I.
The only way you'll know if I've done something wrong is if Nadine Dorries comes out and starts defending me.
God help you. But there should be a method.
Yeah.
In Parliament, in their constitution, generally, that if somebody is in high office,
the police
who
investigation,
has a lot of power, they should be suspended.
Your words and your voice combine to shock me once again into the sheer scale of what we're looking at, Carol. It's under police investigation, and he's still in charge of the police
investigation. You can't deny it.
No, I know. Well, unless you're Nadine Dorries.
And the whole of Number 10. A lot of the Number 10 are.
They're getting this horribly wrong.
And a lot of the ministers.
That's what I mean.
Still support him.
They've abandoned you, and I think they've got it wrong. I really do. I think Nigel is the only non-Tory voter to ring in today, and you all feel horribly betrayed by the upper echelons of the parliamentary party at the moment.
This is
and
a
yet,
party I supported for 50 years.
50 years.
50 years. I'm still a member. Although I've written and stated that as from next year, I want my membership stopped.
Really? But then you lose your right to help choose the replacement, remember? I know you know that.
I don't care. I just can't support a party
that's done this.
That carries on supporting somebody who's in charge of this country. And yet he lies and lies and lies. He has no honesty. He has no integrity. The bedrock of our Conservative Party is rocked to its core.
Well, you say, I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I've been speaking about the bedrock of the country, the things upon which you and I would agree forever more, even though we would disagree about finer points of policy or even ideology, the stuff that we would all agree about. I think the rot there probably set in with Farage, actually, but Johnson was prepared to ride that particularly repellent tiger, wasn't he? Until it collapsed under the weight of his own ambition. 32 minutes after 11 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:36. Just wondering, after Carol's contribution, about the precedent for Prime Ministers being under police investigation. I don't have the encyclopedic knowledge that I'd need, but I would have thought cash for honours was the closest we've come in recent years. 2006, was it? The peers, working peers who were rejected after it emerged that they'd lent a lot of money to the Labour Party. But I don't think Tony Blair personally would have been subject to a... I don't know, actually. So maybe that suggestion that anyone in such a position should be suspended is not held up by history. I don't know. We'll find out. 11:37 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the suggestion running through this morning's programme is that if you're not as disgusted by Boris Johnson as the rest of us are, then you must, by definition, be Nadine Dorries. We may return to that, but Rachel Venables is here with a another really grim story involving the Metropolitan Police.
A watchdog, James, has found multiple cases of bullying and inappropriate behaviour within the Metropolitan Police, discrimination as well, misogyny and harassment, all amongst serving Met Police officers from 3 years ago. This has been uncovered by 9 independent investigations that ran alongside each other by the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and they were looking specifically into 14 officers, most of them PCs, based at Charing Cross Station in the West End. As you know, James, just a few streets away from us here in central London. Now, the report really significantly states quite categorically that what they have uncovered amongst these police officers is not isolated, and they say it is not simply the behaviour of a few bad apples. Language, you know, has been used in the past to justify horrendous reports of misconduct amongst officers. They say this really here, the rot goes quite a bit deeper. And I've been digging into some of the details of this report, which really does make for sickening reading. The officers they found, and I'm going to list some of them now, and I want to issue a bit of a warning as well to listeners. I've obviously had to cut out huge amounts of detail. There's language that I absolutely cannot say and would not repeat on air, but there are going to be some details here of racism and misogyny that people will find offensive and upsetting. We know that they found, for example, that officers went to a festival dressed up as sex offenders and a, quotes, molested child. They sent photos of that amongst this chat. They also repeatedly, some of these officers...
So one of them dressed up as a victim?
As the victim, and the others as sex offenders.
OK.
Otherwise known as, you might say, banter. And that's certainly something that I think this report really gets into, is the culture of banter that allowed this to happen. Some behaving badly, others felt they couldn't challenge it. We also see in several of these messages homophobic language. It's full as well of rape threats, male officers sending threats to female officers, again in terms that you can read were clearly meant to be almost flattering banter, but, would have been received with absolute horror. Racist language and jokes. There's a page of these jokes. As I say, cannot read any of them out. It includes a joke about Auschwitz, referring to a black man as a robber, and some really derogatory terms as well about people with disabilities, and jokes as well about beating their partners. I will read this bit out. One officer sent to another, "You ever slapped your missus?" And then he sent another message saying, it makes them love you more. And he went on and on about this, and the second officer's simple reply was LMAO. So responding as though it was a joke. Now, the report by the IOPC stressed that not all the police officers in the team, they say, shared these views, but they found evidence that they were afraid of speaking out. So they've put forward 15 recommendations that include things like tackling bullying and harassment, making sure that those allegations are investigated independently, and also issues of banter. They've talked about the Met Police really having now to review and ensure its current training and guidance as well on the use of social media, because these would have been sent on social media platforms, perhaps WhatsApp groups. The Met Police, in turn, they've issued really a sincere, it reads, certainly grovelling apology. They said the conduct of this team of officers at Charing Cross Police Station does not represent the values of the Met Police Service. They've said they are deeply sorry to Londoners, to everyone they failed with their appalling conduct. They say since the reprehensible behaviour was uncovered back in 2017, they say they've taken a series of measures to hold those responsible to account. And as I mentioned, 14 officers investigated, 2 found to have cases to answer for gross misconduct. Several of them were disciplined in varying factors. A couple one was dismissed, another found they would have been dismissed if they hadn't already resigned. But it is just another horrendous example, really, of the uphill battle it feels as though the Met has to deal with now against itself, against these sorts of officers. And after we've had cases like the 2 officers who took photos of the bodies of Bieber and Nicole, and of course Wayne Couzens, Sarah Everard, this is another chapter in that story.
They are at pains to stress that these actions happened between 2016 and 2018, as I think you said, and the Met insists that we have taken a series of measures to hold those responsible to account and stamp out unacceptable behaviour. Forgive me if I missed this in your report. I was reeling from the Auschwitz comment, actually. Do we know any details of what has been done to hold those responsible to account?
Well, we know there have been cases like gross misconduct, special case hearing. They've talked about...
and we know they're directly linked to these...
Directly linked to some of these findings. 2 officers subject to unsatisfactory performance procedures. And there's clearly a sense of wider cultural changes that they are seeking to address. And we know there is a wider... Baroness Casey has been asked more widely to look into issues throughout the Metropolitan Police. And clearly this has been known about amongst the top brass in the Met for a while. This will, you would hope...
hoping it doesn't get out.
Yeah.
Well, the IOPC saying we believe these incidents are not isolated or simply the behaviour is a few bad apples. I know I'm repeating you there. I wouldn't normally ask you this question, but we are, for reasons we've been examining on the programme, these efforts to undermine the basic bedrocks of society are gathering pace at the moment, and they reach into the strangest places. So people pointing out the timing is very convenient for the government. Do we know why it's been released today? I think they're also pointing out that Sajid Javid's brother is the assistant commissioner who has been responding to the findings.
Yeah, he's the one who's put out this...
I'm just mentioning it because other people are.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's Deputy Assistant Commissioner. This is Baz Javid, who is a really senior officer in the Met Police, and he's put out a statement saying he is angry and disappointed to see officers involved.
But the decision to go public today will be from the Independent Office for Police Conduct. That will have come from the IOPC,
yes. And they've been publishing updates on this, you can see on their website, for a few years. But obviously, coming today, you'd have to ask them why specifically today. Usually these cases are just, this is the day it's penciled in for, and this is the day they'll drop it. For the benefit
of people being a bit cynical and sceptical, we're also getting an update later today on the report into child sexual abuse, and that is simply stuff that is put in the schedule weeks, months earlier, and if it happens to coincide with political upheaval, it would be actually more suspect for them to then move it or change it because of politics than it is to run the risk of looking as if it has been deliberately scheduled because of politics. Can I have some of that? Or is it all on a screen? Sorry, this isn't very professional. Is it on screen or on paper? Can I have a look at some of the stuff
I can pass you my laptop across now if you'd like to read it.
During the break, actually. But just for my own reference, because we may talk about this at a little more length after 12 o'clock. It's staggering, isn't it? Yeah. And deeply, deeply upsetting.
It is. I mean, I was upstairs in the office reading some of these, and as you scroll down, it just gets worse and worse. And you read this language and you
just think... looking at your face, Rachel.
You just think these are the officers who people would go to report a rape, to report domestic abuse, to report a racist incident. And this is the sort of language that they were either sending or receiving, or they didn't feel that they could go to their superiors to challenge. And as we say, it was a couple of years ago, the Met Police, they have condemned it in the strongest terms, but it's so damaging.
Rachel Venables, many thanks, with details there, grim and grisly details of this report from the Independent Office for Police Conduct, which has made 15 recommendations, including the tackling of those underlying cultural issues. That might be the phrase that we get our teeth into. Underlying cultural issues. The time now is 11:45. 11:49 is the time. I don't know if this will work. It's always a bit dangerous crossing the streams. But if you can send me cartoons from foreign media covering British politics, covering Boris Johnson. I've got two. One from Reg, from a Dutch newspaper, which is a kind of take upon the Dangle Way picture when Boris was famously sort of photographed dangling from some cable car and picking up on the Partygate. He's got bottles poking out all of his pockets. And there's one from... so Reg sent that one in from a Dutch newspaper, and I've got another one from a South African cartoonist called Jonathan Zapiro, which has Boris Johnson coming out of a toaster as a slice of toast, with the dial moving from buffoonery through cronyism to sleaze, pandemic cock-ups, Pekka Pig episode, and Partygate, which is probably an even better. I can see why he's your favourite South African cartoonist, Marty, but equally I am also intrigued, because of the way my mind works, by the idea of having a favourite South African cartoonist. Who, pray, is your favourite who's your favourite Zimbabwean cartoonist, or your favourite Belgian cartoonist? I don't know, maybe you're a student of cartoons, but it is brilliant. So I'd love to see if you can get hold of it. Foreign newspaper and magazine cartoons about Boris Johnson's current travails, and we'd try and get some sort of thread put together. Why? Because it's a lot more entertaining than just reading out headlines even from François and Le Figaro and now run El País, and demonstrate my ignorance of European media titles. But cartoons might be better. 11:51 is the time. Also, they often, of course, don't need... They break the language barrier, although that South African one with the names on the dials needed to be in English. A few more calls on this, and then I think after 12, we've got quite a lot to get through, actually. I want to speak to Nazir Afzal about those Jimmy Savile comments. Nazir, of course, Chief Prosecutor in the northwest of England, while Keir Starmer was DPP, so if anyone's qualified to comment on that contribution to public discourse yesterday, it is Nazir Afzal, and I don't doubt he'll have something to say about this Independent Office of Police Conduct report into the Met as well. So we'll be talking to him in the final hour, and to Theo, because we've had Treasury questions with Rishi Sunak. So be interesting to see whether our earlier caller's observation that he keeps managing to duck questions that the rest of the Cabinet are being wheeled out to field, whether that spell breaks today. And then, as I mentioned when Rachel was in the studio earlier, there is another chapter in the child sex abuse inquiry, of course, that was started under Theresa May, and looking in particular at a kind of organised crime element of trafficking, I think, and what have you. So Matthew Thompson is having that gets released at 12, which gives Matthew time to to go through it before joining us probably at around 12:45. So a packed final hour, a packed show, but underpinning proceedings, really, the combination of questions. The first is, if you're not as disgusted as everybody else with Boris Johnson now, and what he's doing to our country, what he's doing to your party if you're a Conservative, what he's doing to our Parliament, then you must, by definition, be Nadine Dorries. Discuss 0345 6060 973. And a little side order, I think kicked off by Bart, actually, a caller who moved here from Poland 20 years ago. Just wondering how we look from the outside, although we may probably have to return to that territory tomorrow. And do tweet those cartoons. Some of you are texting them. I can't really tweet them if they sent in by text because I'm 50. At Mr. James OB is my Twitter handle. Should be following me anyway. Martin's in Madrid. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for talking to me. It was just on the topic of how you all look.
Yes.
To people abroad. As maybe you can tell from my accent, I'm Irish. I work as a teacher over here.
Okay.
An English teacher, and we have conversation classes. We talk about politics. Sometimes the name Boris Johnson comes up, and I often find that Spanish people, especially young Spanish people, they kind of chuckle when you mention his name, because I think they see him as some sort of Mr. Bean character.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
So for a bit of perspective, like out here in Spain, I mean, it's the case in most places in the world, but here in Spain, the public's confidence in their politicians is just rock bottom. It's to do with corruption, and as well the fact that so many politicians, they're just all seen as the same, no matter what party. You've got parties across the spectrum here, but all of them are kind of presented in the same way.
Yes.
And I think people are just fed up. There's a lot of this fatigue with the politicians in general, and they just want something to come along and shake it up a little bit. I think just before the pandemic, around in the space of 18 months, they had like 3 general elections, and the numbers on the parties just didn't move at all throughout those elections. And people are just so fed up and so boring. And so the people I talk to in my classes, they often, you know, when you talk about Boris Johnson, they kind of laugh and think, you know, he's such a funny character. And in so many words, they say, you know, I wish we had someone like that here.
Okay. Still.
And this yeah. Hello, yeah.
No, I'm just reflecting. Sorry. I'm reflecting on that while simultaneously going through an avalanche of cartoons from foreign newspapers that have just popped up in my inbox. But so I mean, you're talking about teenagers who are finding it funny rather than
of all ages, really. No, it's mostly young people. There's a lot of fatigue among the younger generation.
So the clownish antics are still overcoming the corrupt antics.
On the news reports here in the evening, when they talk about what's going on there in Britain, it's only done in like 60 seconds. They don't really dive into it too much. They don't talk too much about how the public are feeling and how this is affecting, you know, the backlash from the public.
Just got a funny guy who's been throwing lots of parties during lockdown.
And this reminds me as well, because I lived in London before I came to live here, and the state of politics, this was like the middle of the 2000s.
Yes.
It was very similar, I think. Everything was so bland. The two parties were seen as the same. There wasn't much difference. And I think when Boris came along, everyone thought, oh, he's a character, he'll kind of liven things up. I mean, you can certainly say what's true is that British politics is a lot more interesting than it was maybe 15 years ago.
You can't argue with that. So's American politics, though. What attitude do the people we're talking about have to Donald Trump? Do they think he's a bundle of laughs as well?
Until it all went sour.
Until it all went sour. Yeah, thank you, mate. That's a well-travelled man. I thought your lot... Well, I know you're Irish, you're all right. We're outlawing that sort of cosmopolitan lifestyle in this country at the earliest opportunity because we need to put things in the Brexit benefits folder. Martin in Madrid. James is in Barrow in Furness. James, what would you like to say?
Oh, yeah, you're right, James. Thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome, mate. Thanks for calling.
It's the statement is what's got me about it, like the Jimmy Savile ones.
Yeah.
It's like, I said this before, but like all my family used to vote Labour.
Yeah.
They recently flipped, and that's why like Barrow in Furness is now Diamond Fell.
I remember, we spoke before, didn't we?
Yeah, and then we've got my family, I know for a fact, have this blind faith in Boris Johnson. But it's like, if he comes out and he says that in the House of Commons, I have a feeling they're going to believe it, and they won't question it.
And I mean, a couple of people saying that on social media, it's already being shared. It's already being inflated by people who ended up believing various other lies about the politicians they've been groomed to not like or to mistrust. It's more the desperation to keep the faith in Boris Johnson than it is a desperation to think ill of Keir Starmer. I know the two are hard to separate, but when you use the phrase blind faith, it wouldn't matter who the leader of the opposition was in this case. They would believe whatever Boris Johnson said about them because they really want to believe it.
Yeah, that's how I see it. And then you've got, I wouldn't say it's like the US, but it's like the early signs of it, if that makes sense. You've got this, he's saying the Jimmy Savile thing, you caused it in a way, And then it's kind of what Donald Trump did with fake news and how that propaganda started. It's like the early signs of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree as well. I mean, I'd go further. I think it's gone down the line a bit further than that, and that there are, parallels now. I don't know why it was the Nadine Dorries defence that struck me with even more weight than the Boris Johnson lies, but it's that idea of it infecting, of it spreading, and coming at the time when Donald Trump is indeed demanding that Republican candidates seeking his endorsement inflate his lies about the American election. Lies, of course, that led him. I have to say these words again and again and again because some people still don't get it. Lies that led him to incite an armed mob to storm the Capitol building, baying for his own vice president's blood. But hey-ho, that Joe Biden is a bit awful, isn't he? James, thank you, mate. Always good to talk. Because partly, I think last time we spoke, it was in response to calls from the constituencies most at the heart of this current saga, the Red Wall saga, as it were. Coming up to 11:59, and I think we'll park domestic politics, apart from a chat with Nazir Afzal about the Jimmy Savile element, because it's only Tuesday. That's the only explanation you need, isn't it? It's only Tuesday. And I am still, as you can tell from my voice and my slightly distracted air, I am reeling from this Independent Officer Police Conduct Report, and I hate it. As someone who generally tries to stick up for the police in the context of them being lions led by donkeys, so very, very hard to stick up for Cressida Dick at the moment, but comfortable sticking up for the ordinary men and women in uniform, the thin blue line, call them what you will. And then stories like this come along, and well, they make it almost impossible to sustain those defences, to sustain those arguments, until you remember your own workplaces. And we've all shared workplaces with toxic people. Some of us very publicly, most people not so publicly. So how do decent coppers feel today about what's gone on under their noses? 3 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I referenced the Daily Telegraph letters page at the top of the show this morning. There is one here as well which might raise your eyebrows. Paul Walters in Derbyshire writes, who paid for all the alcohol? The partygoers or the taxpayers? I think that might... I wonder whether that will be an emerging element of the story. But it was an element that has already emerged that I wanted to return to first in the company, I'm delighted to tell you, of Nazir Afzal, OBE, former chief prosecutor up in the northwest. In fact, Nazir, it strikes me I could be talking to you about all three stories that I'm covering this hour. The inquiry into the child sex abuse, posting on grooming gangs, where, of course, you led the line on some of the original prosecutions. The Independent Officer Police Conduct Report into behaviour within the Metropolitan Police that would make anybody's hair fall out. But we'll begin with this statement made by Boris Johnson in the House of Commons yesterday, that Keir Starmer spent his time as Director of Public Prosecutions failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile.
Well, what do you want to say? I mean, that's been debunked by an inquiry that took place 10 years ago, conducted by Alison Levitt, QC, who's now a judge of the Crown Court, and she looked at all the facts and came to the view, which I knew because I was there, that Keir had absolutely nothing to do with the decision-making that was taken. In fact, the moment he became aware, he commissioned this inquiry, and the inquiry then led to some seismic changes in the way child sexual abuse was dealt with thereafter. So actually, Keir fixed the problem. He was certainly not responsible for the problem. And in relation to Jimmy Savile, that was just, I mean, what can I say, despicable, low, under the belt.
Well, what did you think then? I mean, we're living in odd times politically, and Boris Johnson is, it's fair to say, behaving in ways that we've never seen a Prime Minister behave before. But what did you feel or think when you heard him say something in the House of Commons that's so...
That's exactly it. I thought I mean, people keep asking me why I'm not in Parliament and why I don't want to be in Parliament. Because I thought that Parliament was a place where we have the greatest leaders with a brilliant debate and ultimately making fantastic decisions. But actually what I heard yesterday was playground taunt. I mean, my son said to me last night, it's like saying your mum when somebody comes back at you with some comment. You know, that's not fitting. It's totally unfitting of a Prime Minister of this country, of this great country. Sadly, James, what it will mean is that some people will think, actually, it must be true. and it leads to...
Well, you've seen what's going to happen on social media, but I mean, deliberate perhaps. That was perhaps the intention of it, but we'll never know, because the Prime Minister won't answer and won't be held accountable for what he did yesterday in the House of Commons.
He won't say it outside of Parliament either, because he doesn't have parliamentary privilege, where he can be sued for libel.
And would it? You think it would meet the threshold for that, given your...
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's been evidenced by an inquiry. I will give evidence, as will many others, to show that Keir had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Jimmy Savile case.
So any journalist who gets to interview him could perhaps urge him to repeat those allegations outside parliamentary privilege, and then...
I noticed how some politicians this morning were straying away and not repeating it.
Yes.
They recognise where they are in this case.
And Dominic Raab, of course, a trained lawyer, believe it or not.
Well, he bought it off the internet by the sound of it.
No. That obviously, you'll have a fair defence there of making it a joke, but I need to make it clear that was not intended as a... you can't meet a libel with a libel.
Yeah, 100%.
Briefly, Nazir, if you would, because the phone line is very odd, actually, very clicky. This police report, into, astonishing misogyny and bullying. How surprised are you to learn that?
Not in the slightest. I've got another case involving another force in the country which hasn't been publicised yet.
Right.
Because we're doing some research. Misogyny, sexism, racism, the bigotries that infect all of our community will also affect the police service.
Yeah.
They're no different. They're a community of 120,000 people. And I think anybody that denies that is completely deluded. The fact is, the saddest thing is, and the most dangerous thing is that they have power. So they can use their power in some cases, to reinforce their hatred of others. And what always beggars belief to me is that we simply think, oh, we'll just deal with this particular bad apple, and then another one turns up, another one turns up. No. What we've always needed is a proper judicial inquiry, as we had in relation to the Stephen Lawrence murder 25 years ago.
And Alistair Morgan as well. So it's
exactly that. We need it because that will identify the extent of the problem and how to resolve it. And as it currently stands, all we do is tinker around the edges, and unfortunately, that kind of behaviour just carries on.
Well, a man who knows of what he speaks, Nazir Afzal, on both of those subjects, and quite easily could have invited comment on the story that Matthew Thompson has been reporting in the news bulletin that we will return to shortly.